Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're diving into a pretty significant story that's been developing.
Yeah,
Basically, the reshaping of U.S. foreign policy
right.
in President Trump's second term.
Big changes. Big
Yeah,
changes.
yeah, since January 2025 when he,
Third
started.
strike office again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got this article that really breaks it down well, I think.
Yeah.
Lays out the key actions, the thinking behind it.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So what we're going to try to do is really just get a clear understanding of what this new approach actually looks like on the ground.
Yeah, get into the specifics.
Yes, specific changes, and then, what are the potential knock-on effects?
Right, because this could have ripple effects
Oh, absolutely.
everywhere.
Both here at home
Yeah, domestically and internationally.
and around the globe.
A lot to unpack.
Yeah, there is. So why don't we just jump right into it?
Sounds good.
And I think maybe starting with a concrete example would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that immediately jumps out is just how decisive some of these early actions have been.
Right,
So by March 2025, just a couple months into the term,
right.
the State Department had already ended aid programs to Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Wow.
And the stated reason was that these programs no longer served U.S. national interest.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just about cutting off the aid.
Okay.
It was also coupled with reversing the Biden administration's easing of sanctions on Cuba.
So really kind of a 1-2 punch.
Exactly. So right away, you see a much firmer stance.
Yeah, a much harder line being taken.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In this region.
Okay. So it's not just these specific countries we're talking about, though, right?
Right.
This seems to be a broader trend.
It does. So February saw an executive order dissolving the Inter-American Foundation.
Right.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar,
And I wouldn't expect everyone to be.
right, it's a bit obscure. It was a long-standing institution focused on grassroots development in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Interesting.
And it really appears that the African Development Foundation might be next. And there's even speculation about the future of AFRICOM.
Right. AFRICOM, U.S. Africa Command for anyone who's
Oh
not
my-
following along there.
So yeah, it really does feel like a fundamental shift
Yeah.
in how the U.S. is seeing its role
Right.
and its engagements across continents.
Across the entire world, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it sounds like these changes are pretty broad in scope, too.
They really are. I mean, beyond these major foundations.
Okay.
The article details cuts to organizations like the U.S. Institute of Peace.
USAI.
Yeah. Which, at its core, works on conflict mediation.
Right.
But also the U.S. Agency for Global Media,
Okay.
the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars,
Yeah.
and even support for political prisoners internationally.
Wow.
So it really is pretty comprehensive.
A dismantling of established structures.
It seems that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting how all this is being framed, too, right? I mean, this isn't it's not like the U.S. is saying, oh, we're stepping back.
Right. We're retreating. No, not at all. They're being very upfront.
It's very much like a proactive.
Yeah, this is deliberate.
Yeah.
It's being portrayed as a bold reimagining,
A reimagining.
of America's global role.
Interesting.
And it's a very deliberate pivot away from the multilateral system
Which has been the norm
for decades.
for so long, right? Working through international organizations
Right.
with allies
Yeah, that whole approach seems to be,
really being overturned.
yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of dive a little deeper into what's driving this then.
Yeah.
And really the engine behind all this seems to be this America First strategy.
Yeah, you could say that's the through line here.
Yeah, so how's that actually playing out now?
Well, I think the America First strategy in this second term
Okay.
seems to coalesce around a few key elements.
Okay.
So first, you have a strong reliance on projecting military strength. Second, economic pressure
Okay.
is clearly a favored tool
Right.
with the aggressive use of tariffs and sanctions.
Right.
And third, we're seeing significant tightening of immigration control.
Yeah.
And what's really notable,
Okay.
and this is maybe the key difference from earlier approaches,
Okay.
is that human rights considerations are way less prominent.
Interesting. So human rights are kind of taking a back seat in this foreign policy framework.
You seem to be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that brings us, I think, to one of the most visible aspects of all this,
Yeah.
this crackdown on illegal migration.
Absolutely.
And one of the more, I think, attention-grabbing policies has been,
The one that's really got people talking.
yeah, this move to deport undocumented immigrants to Guantanamo Bay.
Right. I mean, that immediately raises all sorts of questions.
Yeah, about legal precedent,
Yeah,
human rights.
it definitely does.
And I know there have been some legal challenges already, haven't there?
There have. The article mentions that migrant advocates have brought challenges.
Okay.
But a federal judge expressed skepticism,
Oh, really?
about their legal standing.
Ah,
So that suggests a willingness on the administration's part
okay.
to really check the boundaries
Push the limits
Yeah.
of legal norms.
to achieve these immigration objectives.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just where people are being sent, though, right?
No.
The U.S. is also, actively engaging with other countries on this.
Absolutely.
And the agreement to send suspected Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador
Right.
under President Bukele is a really specific example, I think, of this new approach.
Right. I mean, it really shows you how they're trying to work bilaterally
Yeah.
to address these issues.
So this is a big shift, right?
It's huge.
From how things were done before.
Yeah.
And beyond these direct agreements, though,
Yeah.
we're also seeing the U.S. putting a lot of pressure on other countries in the region.
Right.
Places like Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras.
Yeah.
Right, those are key transit countries.
Yeah. And the article talks about using tariffs and other economic levers.
Right, to basically compel them.
Yeah. Twist their arm.
Yeah, to accept deportees from third countries.
So basically saying, look, if you don't take these people,
You're going to face consequences.
we're going to hit you where it hurts.
Exactly. It's a clear demonstration of using economic power
Yeah.
to achieve immigration policy goals.
So it's really about achieving domestic goals.
Yeah.
Using this international leverage.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, well, speaking of economic power,
Yeah, this was really interesting.
there was this huge development that I think we need to talk about.
All right, this was big news.
The acquisition of both Panama Canal ports
Huge deal.
by a U.S.-led consortium.
Right. Spearheaded by BlackRock.
Yeah, BlackRock.
For $19 billion.
$19 billion with a B.
It's massive.
That's just a huge development.
Yeah. And potentially far-reaching implications.
Yeah. So what's the real significance here?
Well, I think the really interesting thing here
Okay.
is how economic and strategic interests intertwine.
Ah.
Right. So the Panama Canal.
Right.
This is an absolutely critical artery
For global trade.
for global trade. And this acquisition gives the U.S., through a private entity,
Okay.
significant operational control.
Ah, okay.
And to make it even more interesting,
Okay.
a Hong Kong-based firm was basically displaced in this deal,
Oh, wow.
which probably explains China's strong reaction.
I was going to say China must not be happy.
No, they called it economic bullying,
Really? Wow.
which I think highlights how these economic moves are being viewed on a global stage.
Yeah, it's not just about the money.
No, not at all. It's about
Yeah.
power dynamics.
Absolutely. And this might not even be the final chapter here.
You think,
Well, the article hints that there might be potential U.S. military action.
what? To further secure control of the canal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they even draw a parallel to past considerations involving Venezuela
Wow. So they're really not shying away from...
from the military option.
No.
So what do we make of that?
Well, I think this suggestion of potential military moves really underscores
Okay.
the core of this America First approach,
Okay.
a willingness to project power,
Yeah.
potentially unilaterally,
Right.
to safeguard what the administration defines as critical U.S. interests.
So it's really about, look, we're going to define what's important to us,
And we're going to act.
and we're going to do what we need to do to protect it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's a move away from relying solely on diplomacy or economic means
Right. It shows a readiness to use hard power.
when they deem necessary.
Exactly.
Okay. So this more unilateral.
Yeah, this go-it-alone kind of stance.
Right. An assertive stance.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to be just about economic and immigration policies.
Right.
The article also points to some pretty significant issues with NATO allies.
Oh, yeah. This has been a big source of tension.
Yeah. And for anyone listening who might not know,
Right.
NATO's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
The big military alliance.
Yeah, that's been the cornerstone of Western security for decades.
For a very long time.
And it sounds like things are really fraying.
Yeah.
The article talks about open disputes.
Yeah,
And that's pretty serious language, I think, in diplomatic circles.
it is.
To talk about open disputes with your allies.
It suggests a real breakdown
Yeah.
in trust and communication.
Yeah. So what's going on there?
Well, the article talks about the use of tariffs and even annexation threats.
Wow, annexation threats.
to exert influence over NATO allies
So basically saying, we might take over part of your country
if you don't fall in line.
if you don't do what we want.
Exactly. I mean, that is a huge departure
From how the U.S. has typically dealt with.
with its allies.
Yeah.
It suggests this much more transactional view
Yeah.
of these partnerships.
Like almost a business transaction, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to give you this.
But we expect this in return.
Yeah, you owe us.
Wow. So, and this shift is evident in the approach to the war in Ukraine too, right?
Absolutely.
The article talks about a reduction in intelligence and military support to Kyiv,
Right.
with the stated aim of pushing Ukraine towards negotiations with Russia.
Basically saying it's time to come to the table.
Yeah. Let's wrap this up.
Let's get this over with.
Which is a pretty major change
It is.
in how the U.S. has been engaging with this conflict.
Yeah, for the past couple of years.
Yeah, so what's going on there?
Well, I think it signals a potential change in priorities
Okay.
towards trying to find a quick resolution,
Right.
even if it means that Ukraine has to make some concessions.
Wow.
And I think the article brings up two really fascinating examples
Okay.
that I think illustrate the kind of thinking that's going on in this administration.
Okay.
So first you have Elon Musk's briefly considered action regarding Starlink in Ukraine.
Right. Starlink being that crucial communication tool
Exactly.
that Ukraine's been relying on.
Right. And
That-
then there's also his earlier suggestion to shut down Voice of America.
Right.
These are really unconventional ideas
Yeah.
and approaches.
Right.
And then to make it even more interesting,
Yeah.
there was an executive order
Oh, wow.
to shut down Voice of America.
So they actually went through with that.
They did.
Wow.
So I think this really emphasizes
Yeah.
this willingness to dismantle established tools.
Yeah. To throw out the old playbook.
Right. We're going to do things our way.
This is the new way.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of these actions really paint this picture of just a fundamental desire to reshape U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah. They're not messing around.
No, they're not.
Mm.
But the article also highlights a key challenge,
Okay.
which is overcoming the entrenched bureaucracy.
Right. The so-called deep state.
Right. That supposedly resisted President Trump's policies in his first term.
Right.
So what are they doing this time around to make sure these changes are implemented?
Well, the article suggests that the administration learned some lessons from the first term.
Okay.
Right. So in the first term,
Yeah.
career officials would sometimes use tactics like leaking information
Ah, okay.
or just delaying implementation to push back against the president's agenda.
Yeah.
And so the administration is taking a much more proactive stance this time around.
So they're trying to make sure
Yeah, that they have people in place.
that they can trust.
Exactly. Who are going to carry out their vision.
Right.
And I think the growing skepticism towards the civil service within the Republican Party
Yeah.
is also a significant factor here
Yeah.
in this push to try and streamline and control the foreign policy apparatus.
Right.
And the article even mentions the Schedule F order,
Oh, right. For the first term.
which aimed to reclassify many civil service positions,
Right.
which could have made it easier to hire and fire career officials.
Yeah.
But that was later rescinded by President Biden.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not just about changing the policies themselves. Right. It's about reshaping the personnel.
The people.
And the organizational structure.
Yeah,
We need to get the right people on the bus and in the right seats.
exactly.
Yeah. And it sounds like the scale of this is massive.
It's huge.
I mean, we're talking about dismantling NGOs,
Right.
think tanks,
Yeah.
aid agencies.
All these institutions that have been
so integral to U.S. foreign policy
For decades. Since World War II.
since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really a remarkable shift.
And the article makes this really interesting comparison
Oh,
to George W. Bush's approach.
interesting.
So, Bush obviously emphasized military power after 9/11.
Yeah, of course.
But he also invested significantly in soft power initiatives.
Like PEPFAR,
Hmm?
the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief.
Yeah.
These were huge programs.
Yeah.
And along with established entities like USAID,
Right. USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development.
the Peace Corps. These became really deeply embedded in the landscape of U.S. foreign engagement.
Yeah.
And they really haven't been challenged until now.
Until now, it seems like, yeah. And it's important to acknowledge that there's this kind of historical self-interest
Right.
that has often been interwoven with U.S. foreign aid.
Absolutely.
The article points out that USAID itself has admitted that a significant portion of its contracts have benefited U.S. companies.
Right. It's not all altruism.
No.
There's definitely an economic dimension.
So while there's obviously often this humanitarian aspect,
Of course.
it's not the whole story.
Right. There's also an economic aspect to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the article even has some figures about this,
Right.
about official development assistance, or ODA,
Yeah.
in 2018,
Right.
and its increase under Biden by 2023.
Which really shows.
And this was still a relatively small percentage
Yeah.
of the overall federal budget.
But it's still billions of dollars.
But it was a lot of money.
It's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, and that's all being targeted for reduction now.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so the article suggests that this labeling of organizations,
Right.
like USIP
Yeah.
and the Inter-American Foundation, as partisan, is a deliberate tactic
Oh, yeah.
to undermine their credibility and make it easier to justify cutting their funding.
Absolutely.
So what's the thinking there?
I think the strategy is to try and portray these organizations as politically biased
Okay.
so that they can get more support for defunding them,
Okay.
especially when you couple that with these long-standing questions
Yeah.
about the effectiveness and efficiency of foreign aid spending.
Right, which have been around forever.
Right. I mean, the article even references a 2015 Inspector General report
Oh, wow.
highlighting these systemic flaws
Mhm.
within USAID
So these problems have been known about for a while.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And then there were 2017 critiques from the Carnegie Endowment
Right.
that pointed to overstretched and unfocused efforts.
So basically, we're spending all this money.
But are we actually achieving anything?
Are we really making a difference?
Maybe it's time to rethink this whole thing.
Right.
So I think all of these critiques
Okay.
provide supporting arguments for those who are looking to
Yeah.
downsize or eliminate these institutions.
It's really about shrinking the footprint
It seems to be, yeah.
of the U.S. government in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me that even an organization like USIP,
right.
with its original mandate of conflict mediation,
Which you would think would be
nonpartisan,
nonpartisan.
right,
Yeah.
is now being viewed with this kind of skepticism
Yeah.
and labeled as a nation-building relic.
It's really remarkable.
So why this shift in perspective, do you think?
Well, I think that label reflects a broader change
Okay.
in how the administration views America's role in the world.
Okay.
The focus seems to be shifting away from these long-term,
Right.
complex engagements in conflict resolution and nation building, and towards more immediate and tangible outcomes
Okay.
that are often achieved through unilateral action.
So it's about, we want to see results.
We want to see them now.
And we're going to do it ourselves.
Exactly. And the article also mentions AFRICOM's evolution
Okay.
from focusing on broader security goals to primarily counterterrorism efforts.
Okay.
And the article says it's had scant success.
Scant success. So basically a failure.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
So again, I think this suggests
Yeah.
a similar reassessment
Okay.
of the effectiveness of long-term engagement in security matters.
So long-term engagements are out. It seems like it's all about the short game now.
It seems that way, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the information and influence part of this too, right?
Right.
Which seems to be its own can of worms.
Absolutely.
And the article points to the declining impact of U.S.-backed media outlets,
yeah.
like Voice of America,
Right.
compared to both state-sponsored competitors, and the rise of these decentralized social media platforms.
Which are everywhere now.
Yeah. So what's the significance of this development?
Well, I think this presents a huge challenge to traditional U.S. efforts to shape global narratives.
Okay.
So in today's information environment, which is so fragmented,
Right.
traditional state-funded media
Okay.
really struggles to cut through the noise.
Yeah, because you've got so much competition.
Yeah, from all sides.
Some everywhere.
And the article contrasts this with China's Belt and Road Initiative,
Okay.
which arguably yields more significant strategic gains in terms of influence.
Because they're actually doing stuff.
Building things.
Yeah. Tangible stuff.
Tangible things. Investing in infrastructure.
Right.
And they're getting results.
Right. And then the article also brings up the examples of Russia and Israel,
Okay.
where the use of unilateral force is perceived by some as being more effective
Right.
and achieving immediate and decisive results.
And I think the overall theme here is
Yeah.
that this administration favors direct action.
Yeah.
Quick, tangible wins.
Right.
over coalition building.
Yeah, over the kind of long-term
Slog.
of building consensus
Yeah.
and influencing through traditional diplomatic and informational channels.
We're not going to wait around.
Yeah.
We're going to do it ourselves.
We're going to do it now.
Exactly.
Yeah. So all these shifts that we've talked about
Right.
really have some profound implications
You do.
for the existing global order.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest, I think, is this potential unraveling of the U.S. champion system of free trade
Yeah. I mean, that has been the bedrock
for so long.
for so long of global economics.
And it sounds like that's all being thrown into question now
It seems to be.
with
Yeah.
President Trump's imposition of these blanket tariff hikes
Right.
and engagement in all these trade battles.
And not just with China,
No.
with allies, too.
Yeah. And this is a real departure
Huge departure.
from decades of U.S. trade policy.
Absolutely. I mean, for decades.
Both Republicans and Democrats
Yeah, administrations from both sides of the aisle.
generally supported this idea of reducing trade barriers.
Yeah.
And now we've got this more protectionist approach.
Yeah.
So what are the risks here?
Well, I think one of the biggest risks is that this undermines U.S. standing as a reliable trading partner.
Okay.
Right? So it's all about trust.
Yeah.
And if countries can't trust the U.S., then start looking elsewhere.
For other options.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that could potentially threaten the dollar's role as the global reserve currency
Oh, wow.
and raise concerns about its commitment to ensuring the security of global shipping lanes.
Which the U.S. has always
Agreed.
been the guarantor of, yeah,
Right. I mean, all of these are fundamental pillars
of the international economic system.
of how the world works.
Yeah.
And all of that's now in question.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And it's not just the economic stuff, right?
Mm.
I mean, this traditional emphasis on democracy promotion
Yeah.
as a key part of U.S. foreign policy
Right.
also seems to be going by the wayside.
It does.
And the article highlights this really interesting example,
Okay.
which is the contrasting rhetoric
Okay.
that's used when referring to leaders like Zelensky.
The president of Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
And Putin.
The president of Russia.
Yeah. So what do you make of that?
Well, historically, the U.S. has obviously supported authoritarian regimes
Right.
when it's been perceived to be in its strategic interest.
Right.
But there's usually at least a rhetorical commitment.
Yeah. Lip service paid to democracy.
Yeah, to democracy promotion
Right.
globally. And that seems to be diminishing.
Yeah.
The emphasis now seems to be much more on these transactional relationships
Okay.
and less of a focus on the internal political dynamics of other nations.
So basically, we don't care so much what you do at home,
As long as you play ball with us
as long as you're cooperating
on the things that matter to us.
on our terms.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So maybe the biggest shift of all, and this is really kind of the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
is that it seems like there's this fundamental change in the U.S.'s posture
Right.
towards international law and global norms.
Yeah.
And the article even points to the U.S. seemingly aligning with countries like Russia and Israel
Wow.
on issues like border changes.
Interesting.
So what does this signal?
Well, I think it potentially signals a move towards a might makes right approach
Wow.
in international relations.
So basically, if you're strong enough to do it,
You can get away with it,
yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
pretty dangerous precedent.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
Huge.
I mean, for decades, the U.S. has often, with its European allies,
Yeah.
been the primary advocate for a rules-based international order.
Yeah. We need to play by the rules.
Right. And now it seems like they're saying,
Forget the rules.
Yeah.
It's all about power.
so what are the potential consequences of this?
Well, this could be a truly seismic shift
Okay.
for the international landscape.
Okay.
I mean, for many decades, the U.S. really has championed this idea
Right.
of a rules-based international order.
Right.
And by seemingly endorsing the idea,
Huh.